Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hello,
Hello.
we've got. Hey there, Casimir. Hi, Chris.
Hello,
Hello.
Bally.
Hey, Bally. Hi there. Is that Richard or Chris? Hi there, Tom. Hi, Ivan. I'm glad you got the link. Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah,
Fantastic.
but I was sitting going, I'm sure I'm supposed to be somewhere. And then I had a look and I went, oh, yes, of course. And then I went, oh, no.
I'm,
Anyway,
I'm super excited about this session, and I hope you've got your notepad because I have, and I'll be
yep,
taking tons of notes. Of course, my AI will also be taking notes.
oh, cool.
And that's always the thing, right? To have your AI doing
Hmm.
that, but I still do that, like still write notes. Good to see everyone here on this Wednesday. And yeah, so for those of you who perhaps are new, we've got a billionaires row. I'm not sure who that is, but we oh, that's Richard. Hi
Hi, good
there, Richard.
hi, good
Good to
morning.
see you.
My computer rebooted at 10:56, so I'm
Of course.
just recovering.
Oh, good. To-
Naturally.
Yeah, and I've got a weird error message that I have to debug in a little bit, but always fun. But at least it could have been worse, right? It could have been at 10:59.
Yeah. And a meltdown and not restarted, eh?
You're here. You're here, and it's an absolute pleasure. It's a pleasure to have
Oh,
Chris, both of you here on. Absolute pleasure. And
just
some of
changing the
you
background.
will have you've of course seen Richard. Richard's been here. Most of you know Richard. Perhaps you've connected with Richard one-on-one. And we also today have Chris Feemster, who has also joined us. So I am going to hand over to them, and just to say this is the bi-weekly session. We have these sessions every other Wednesday. We run at 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. UK time, and we don't miss a session, right? We've been doing this for 2 years. So welcome to the bi-weekly session. I am going to hand over to Richard and Chris. I mean, it might, if you'd like to say a little bit about yourselves also,
Yeah,
that would be fantastic. And then people know a little bit about you. And for everyone here, pose your questions. You can ask a question. Hi, Hyatt, lovely to have you on. And you can put a question in the chat. I'll keep an eye out on the chat. And of course, input, we'll share kind of at the end of this presentation. If you may have questions at the end, that's brilliant. We won't stop midway unless there's something relevant that you think, okay, I want to ask this question. Are you okay, Richard, Chris, for people to ask midway?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. This isn't a monologue. We'll definitely, and we're gonna try to keep it in the spirit of wherever it goes. In
Dialogue.
terms of questions and whatnot. So I shared my screen. I guess I can operate from there if that works for everyone.
Perfect.
Um,
We can see it,
awesome.
and yeah, perfect. And Chris said dialogue. I love that. So thank you, Chris. So it's more of a conversation. So people have questions as they're going through. It'll trigger things perhaps as the conversations are going. It may come up following. That's okay. So we can always then cover those questions. And feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand, your virtual hand, and enjoy the session. And thank you again, both of you, for being here, delivering this session today live for us all.
A pleasure.
All, all righty. Shall we get started, as they say? So, yeah, a little bit about myself and Chris. We are part of. I created an organization called Secure Justice AI, which is really about helping clients really address the end-to-end infosec, cyber, AI governance, controls and guardrails, all within a single work stream. oftentimes what happens is with managed services providers, for example, you'll get 3 different vendors and they're kind of overseeing that quilt or patchwork of interaction. We try to streamline that and bring it all together, because today it really is an overarching strategy that you have to have in approaching this, because you have autonomous agents that work, for example, with traditional cyber attacking. And if you don't have good password hygiene or using multi-factor authentication, which is, kind of core fundamentals on the InfoSec side, then that's going to find its way downstream and cause problems in your cybersecurity and in your AI governance. So that's kind of our approach. I'm kind of the AI guy. I've been involved in AI for now at least 4 years. When I got into a mastermind run by a brilliant Brit who each day, or each week rather, we have 4 or 5 sessions throughout the week. Tom Martin's part of that community. And we basically go over how to use AI. What are the advances? What are the products that are coming out with? Because obviously things move very quickly. What are the proper products to use for the proper application, but also more of a general understanding about how to use AI effectively and efficiently. Those are kind of the 2 buzzwords that kind of surround that. So my original background was in software development and product and project management. I did a Y2K project for Goldman Sachs back in the day that was very successful. So successful, they called us back 5 years later to create a webified version of it. And then they were kind enough to let us white label that and sell it to most of Wall Street in the corporate travel, expense management, and accounting space. And that's really served me well in this AI age, because as you can see from people, like Bally, those of us who are versed in creation, or, and software certainly is in that space, gives us, I think, a really big advantage over, engineers, for example. I love engineers, worked with them for decades. But today, the critical piece is on understanding use cases, understanding, what the client's needs are, the problem you're solving, and, building a scope of work, building an understandable document around that. And then you can just hand that off to Claude Cowork and have it create your prompts for you, and then use code and actually write applications today. It's pretty awesome. So that's a little bit about me. I'll let Chris Feemster, who he and I are a partner. He founded an organization called Cognify Solutions, which is the AI governance engine in our secure justice piece. Chris, you want to come off camera and give us a quick introduction to you? I'll probably do most of the presenting, but Chris is really the nuts and bolts guy around what AI governance contains, from a really deep understanding. I'm kind of the high level guy that tries to bring these things together. Chris?
Hey, no worries at all. Richard, you flatter me and give yourself too little credit, but indeed. Yes, I'm Chris Feemster with Cognify Solutions, a part of Nexus Systems. Our motto is secure technology stewardship. And in the realm of AI, we develop solutions, we sit with clients. We ultimately want to make sure that AI is built as a something to help the agency as of humanity, and not as a replacement for it, which leads us right into the conversations of governance, right into the conversations of stewardship, and in places like here today. So I want to not belabor too much time, but just say that I'm stand up with Richard and say we're thankful for this spot, and I invite my partner to take it away.
Yes, and please forgive for not acknowledging Bally. She's a dear friend, and thank you for the opportunity to really speak today.
Yes.
Recognizing that most of you are entrepreneurs or coaches, and this presentation really speaks to you, but also to who your clients, more importantly, I think, that you really kind of need to know their profile. And today it's really important to know what is their understanding, what is their mindset around their approach to AI. Because as we're going to explore together, a lot of that is really lagging behind in terms of what the AI capabilities are. So, and that's why I say adoption isn't the goal. I mean, we all talk about adoption, and we know AI is high adoption. In most industries, it's 70% or higher. So people are using AI all over the place. But competency level, well, that's another story. And we'll get into why that is such a concern and why really we are all compelled to really learn about AI, and we'll talk about what that really truly means. And I I often say things like, I believe people like Bally and myself and Chris and probably others on the call have put in the time and can consider ourselves at some level experts of AI. But I wouldn't go on YouTube and watch a dentist pull a tooth and try to do that on myself or my wife. No, that's, and AI is no different. You know, it's not just a tool. It is a really it's a platform. It's an alter ego. It can become your chief of staff, your assistant. Most people characterize it as a 5-year-old genius. And when you deploy it, you kind of have to be mindful of that and, kind of handle it like as if it were a very intelligent intern. The problem is many people don't look at it that way. They confuse intelligence with accuracy, and that's a fatal mistake in using AI. So how many of you have used an AI tool this week that you really haven't actually been trained on it? And what I mean by training is it's not watching. Yeah, I think we can all identify with that. But training is not watching a couple of YouTube videos by marketers or people who claim to be experts. There are experts out there in YouTube that if you kind of search around and you may be able to find them. But frankly, it's, YouTube and social media are penetrated by a ton of amateurs pretending to be professionals in AI. So you have to be cautionary about that. Training is best when you take an expert in the space like Bally, who does these webinars every other week and provides just incomparable, levels of information and practical uses of AI, and to build on that by taking that into your own personal workspace or your client's workspace and actually doing the work. Using AI is kind of like sports. The more reps you do, the better you get at it. You don't walk out of bed and run a marathon. No, you train up to it. You build up to it. And also you have to invest. You invest in gear, food, and all those kinds of things. Right now there's really no certifications in AI, unlike you have, all these certifications in cyber and networking through Microsoft, Google, and whatever. AI really hasn't gotten to that point yet. So who is an expert? Am I an expert? Is Chris an expert? Is Bally an expert? You have to kind of identify for yourself and quantify and qualify everything and everyone, including who's talking today. One of the groups I belong to is the project management group, and they're actually rebuilding their what they call the PMBOK, which is essentially just the project management scope of work document. But they're infusing that now with AI, which is really good because AI is a very useful tool for project managers or for a lot of venues because it saves a ton of time. So there's classes on LinkedIn, Udemy. Try an online university for coursework if you really want to get into using AI with rigor. Most of the large language models like Anthropic, OpenAI also have extensive help pages, which are really good. And Anthropic, for example, offers their own webinars in training in certain areas. So it's like anything else. As professionals, we invest in what it is that we do. We need to make the same investment in AI. As an entrepreneur, it used to be we split 1/3 of our time in marketing, 1/3 of our time in running the business, and 1/3 of our time in client execution. Now it's 4 pieces. It's those 3 pieces plus how do I learn and use AI effectively in my business? It is a time investment, and you need to make that investment in order to enhance those other 3 components and bring them to the level where you're leveling up your marketing, how you run your business, and how you serve your clients. But you can't, don't think of AI as a thin layer that sits on top of it. No, it is an equal pillar with those other 3 that we have to consider in the way we incorporate it with intentionality in our business. If I'm talking too much, I'll keep a mindful eye on the time here. So why this conversation and why now? Well, AI adoption has outpaced every technology rollout that we can compare it to in the past, personal computers, internet, but training hasn't kept up. Because those evolutions were slower, we had much more time, to train ourselves and take it at a reasonable pace. In the space of AI, things are happening so fast. And again, as I said earlier, speed does not connote accuracy. So the gap between using AI functionally and using it correctly and efficiently and effectively, that's where the damage happens, or can happen, by producing substandard content that could have inaccuracies, for example. And that gap is what we're kind of here to talk about today. So some of the numbers: 80% of office workers use public AI tools without their IT department's knowledge or approval. That's what we call shadow AI. That comes right from Microsoft, folks. Probably that was contributed because Microsoft's inherent large language model, Copilot, was so substandard that it forced people to go outside and use the Claudes and the OpenAIs of the world. But only 15% of organizations have updated their acceptable use policies that even mention AI. So, that speaks to, the governance piece of this. And I think I do a lot of work with lawyers, and 70 to 80% of lawyers use AI, of course, similar numbers, but less than 10% of them indicated that either they or the law firm they work for has any kind of AI governance or even AI SOPs or policies that are written and enforced. So, that's why we're running into so many issues these days. So let's talk about what AI is in plain English, okay? So I mentioned earlier that, an AI large language model is kind of like a 5-year-old genius or an intern. You got to keep them on a short leash. But think of them as someone that's read just about everything that's out there. When these large language models first started out, they consumed a lot of available content. That's why you had lawsuits between OpenAI and the New York Times and Anthropic and millions of authors because they stole their content. They ripped it down from wherever they could find it. And yes, early on there were bias. We heard about, OpenAI originally was written in a way that was biased towards African Americans and so on and so forth. So, there was a learning curve there. But keep in mind that AI's never worked a day in your business. It doesn't know your customers, and it would rather guess confidently than admit, I don't know. In the software space, we used to wait 12 months, realistically, when Microsoft would come out with a new operating system or a new version of Office before we would even adopt it, right? We would wait for the 2 or 3 service pack releases that would give us the confidence level that, hey, it's stabilized. In AI, you're lucky if you get 12 hours, right? And everything is in beta. And disclaimers and qualifiers up the wazoo saying that AI can be inaccurate. That's great when I'm using it to do research. You're telling me what it's going to give back to me is not accurate? That seems counterintuitive in some ways. But folks, this is how AI was originally created. So you have to treat it like it is a beta product. Things will go wrong, and again, coming from a software guy, yeah, that's pretty irritating, to be honest. But beta products help you make the product better. That's the world we live in with AI today. We're captive to OpenAI and Anthropic, Gemini, whatever, as these products begin to, at lightning speed, try to improve and enhance what they do. But, that's going to reflect in some issues and some bugs. So wait, verify, and then rely on it. So how businesses are using AI well, and what's the common thread here? It's really human control. I kind of object to people that say AI is a tool. Yeah, it's a hammer that can hammer in a nail, so that analogy probably works. But it's also really an alter ego. So much of what we talk about in use of AI is through memory and custom instructions and persistent interactions and building of context, is to try to train it on what we do, who we are, how we write, how we present ourselves, what are our values, what are all, who we truly are, to get it to kind of learn so we can speak our voice and it can more closely provide what it is that we're ultimately seeking. But human judgment, we are the decision makers. In that sense, AI is an accomplice. It should never be used to make decisions. We own the decision, we determine the context, and we hold it accountable. Some of the challenges that we're seeing, particularly in the legal space with all these falsified citations, are people are not doing this. And again, don't confuse speed with accuracy. AI is super fast. It can draft, it can do repetitive things, it can do heavy lifting, it can, do meeting summaries. But I was talking to a legal tech expert a couple of weeks ago, and they're saying the new area of concern from a legal perspective is the way AI summarizes meetings, just meetings. Forget about client interactions or legal documents. Don't assume that when whatever it is, even fathom that the meeting summary is 100% intact. It makes spelling errors. It attributes things to the wrong person. So we always need to have our eyes and hands, on whatever the output is, because either one of those, without human judgment and AI working in tandem, it creates liabilities. Sorry. So where does it go wrong? Well, we could spend an entire day on this. But just quickly, again, we talked a little bit about hallucinations, or maybe we haven't. We're going to get into that. Depending on the task and the quality of the context building and prompting that you do in the session, your error rate can be anywhere from 3 to 25%. Now, 3% sounds pretty cool. I create co-work skills where I've adopted some of the fact-checking principles that a RAG like Perplexity does, and I've brought that into Claude Code, and I tell Claude Cowork rather, in producing, I have skills that create blog posts and social posts, and I say you need to validate to at least a 95th percentile that your outputs are fact-checked, and I always need citations. So that's kind of what I've done to address the high error rate. I hope I'm not scaring people. I'm not trying to scare anyone with all this. I'm just trying to, really relay, and Bally, I'm certain, concurs with all this because she's deeply and intimately entrenched in AI and has a brilliant mind around this as well. Untrained use, handing an AI tool without any formal training is, tantamount to giving a dentist assistant, here, pull this tooth. It's just, a recipe for disaster. I have VAs. They use all of my AI platforms, but I train them. And when I did software development, I always spoke to my developers and instilled in them what the business logic was behind what the product that they're building. Context. Context is king, not prompting. Sensitive data exposure. Well, we've all heard about, people sharing their tax returns on in a large language model, or the famous incident when Samsung, released information about a new product in their smartphones in ChatGPT that one of their competitors actually stumbled on and then built the same features, negating billions of dollars of research and development with Samsung. So there's plenty of examples of that. Tool sprawl is another one, using 15 or 20 different tools in a niche capacity rather than trying to settle on a primary app, which I've done with Claude, because I think right now it's the company with the highest level of ethics. And I think Claude, because it has design, co-work, code, chat, projects, it fundamentally has a treasure trove of capabilities and functionality to it. OpenAI, probably close, but there are reasons which I won't get into, many of the political, that they, to me anyway, seem to be a lesser choice. Another issue is sharing AI recipes. This became a big thing with all these guys on Instagram hawking N8N, automations and selling them for $19 to whoever would buy them. And then, of course, you download that, and then it doesn't work because it was designed, basically for whoever developed it, but it doesn't work in your environment because you have to get into the guts and make all these changes in your credentials and your paths to wherever the files are. It's almost more work than starting it from fresh and teaching yourself how to build it. So these are just some of the areas where it's really gone wrong. Now we're going to get into a little bit more on the governance side that Chris and I like to speak about, and what I like to call AI hygiene, which is really, I look at AI governance as where you're kind of running. AI hygiene is crawling. It's it's kind of like we crawl, we walk, and we run. The problem is if you're just looking at governance without understanding how to crawl through AI, how to learn to walk through AI, it really kind of negates what it is. So you can't govern what you don't understand. I mean, that's as old as the day. So hygiene has to precede governance. What hygiene means is basic literacy. What an LLM is, what it can do, what it can't do, how to check its work, why you should never include sensitive data in a large language model conversation. And obviously making sure things like it doesn't learn from your data, and being aware of situations like OpenAI restores your data for 30 days before it releases it. What do we know it's doing within those 30 days? We don't, AI large language models, we don't really know what's going on there. Plus, OpenAI, as far as I know, still has to retain log files of every conversation and chat out there because they're being sued by the New York Times for copyright infringement. And the federal court said, well, in the meantime, until this court case is settled, we're going to hold on. You need to hold on to the log files in case they're introduced as evidence. So, and then there's the 10,000 hour principle. That's the in the Tony Robbins world, I think is where that. Or actually, no, it came from. Chris, do you know where that came from? I know there's a gentleman, one of the personal development gurus came up with that. Essentially, as I said earlier, if to claim expertise in any area, you got to put in 10,000 hours, right? That's what you go to college for. If you're in the medical community, you do your residency and all these things that lead up to that level of expertise. AI is no different. I'm not saying we all have to put in 10,000 hours of education in AI. I'm just letting you know that's really the benchmark if you want to call yourself an AI expert, or in many ways to be able to effectively and efficiently use AI. So a couple quick tips: verify before you send. Again, don't confuse speed with accuracy. Check every AI output before it leaves your hands. And if you don't like something about it, don't correct the document itself. Go back and have the AI make the corrections and tell it where it misstepped, and so that it can learn from it. And if you're using skills, then you obviously update the skills so the next time it doesn't make the same mistake. Um, Here's something we like to call the billboard rule. So don't include anything you wouldn't want to see out there on a billboard, public knowledge. And know your tools. There are many, many tools in AI. And I know Bally's done some great sessions on which ones are best for which. And that also encompasses how to do things like, manage your tokens. So there's a lot of that and a lot of great information that Bally has shared with us in the past. Just, perhaps go through her community and you can find them. Chris, anything to add on your side before I move on to really the guts of what governance and guardrails are, and get your feedback on this next slide as well? All right, he
One
might
thing
be.
to think was I stopped for a moment. There's a context of a slide I wanted to try to pull up where it says a computer can never be held responsible. Therefore, a computer should never make a management decision. And I think that underscores a lot of what you're talking about and helps kind of ground governance for, I guess I'd say, first principles right there.
Indeed. Thanks. So this next slide is really, we've built this certainly, from our understanding of AI governance and guardrails, which is really the core, again, of what Cognify does. And I actually created a takeaway. I think Bally will circulate it at some point that kind of encompasses all of these elements. Turning hygiene into policy. What do we do? How can we? And again, we can apply this towards ourselves, which I encourage you to do, or certainly in any kind of client interaction. This can be helpful to them. And the interesting thing about working with clients is the more that they're able to discover for themselves, the more it really resonates with them. So, you might be able to share something like this with them and sit down and explain it with them. So, create a one-page AI use policy. It doesn't have to be anything, too detailed. What are the approved tools? What are the banned data types that you can't share? PI, HIPAA, client-related data. What are the review rules? When you get the output back from the large language model, how do you fact check it? Use a RAG for that. What are the escalation steps? In the event, something is noticed, misuse and whatnot. How do you deal with that? If it's in most cases, we call that a training issue, not an employee issue. Risk classification is a big one. What are we using AI for? If it's just for brainstorming and creating outlines and that kind of conversation, that's relatively low risk. But if we're doing customer facing stuff, if we're taking a deposition from a client and saying, what are the gaps in their testimony I have to be worried about, for example, or I'm looking at a financial analysis and saying, point out to me what are 10 opportunities here to reduce cost in my enterprise. Stuff like that, as you can imagine, should really be very closely guarded and have intense guardrails. You don't want to share that in a public large language model that's learning from your data. I mean, that's just tantamount to disaster. Do your vendor due diligence. If you're using, any kind of tool or service to store your data, understand where your data lives, understand obviously how effective they have their own capabilities to secure your data. And of course, as I said before, I don't think there's any purpose in ever allowing an LLM to learn from our data. So I just summarily turn them off in all the large language models. And you have to be careful because each of them do that differently. Some of them are more pervasive and more aggressive. I would put Gemini in that category. Gemini is going to learn from our emails and our YouTube videos anyway. OpenAI, less so. And Claude doesn't really have any of those additional capabilities to build on it in its large language model. And then, of course, human review checkpoints. Define exactly where that responsibility that Chris talked about. Just because the computer, program made a mistake, ultimately we're responsible. So fact checking is a big thing, and sometimes a RAG like Perplexity is useful. If nothing else, it's going to tell you where the information came from. Now, most of the large language models can do that as well, but they don't volunteer it. And that's a big distinction. Many of these large language models, you sometimes expect that they would volunteer information, and some of them do, but it's to me, in my view, it's not always consistent. You have to ask for it. Like the old saying goes, if you don't ask for something, the answer is always no. All right, I want to be mindful of time, so let me just kind of breeze through the next couple here. So, we kind of came up with a 30-day starting point or program on how you can deploy this policy. Write the one page, pilot one low risk workflow within the community and share that with everyone. Train the team, and then review the results, and then decide, okay, is this ready to be scaled if I'm taking it to another level? So track what matters. What time was saved? Was the error rate on this process? And what did I do to diminish it? And trust signals, complaints or reviews or input back from people that question things. And don't skip week 3. Training the team is the most invaluable step in all of it. And take the time to do it. This slide again is more. Actually, we bypassed this quick slide on AI hallucinations. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. I think we all know what a hallucination is. We also know the impact negatively that it can have. And again, we've talked about the fact that large language models are designed to hallucinate. In contrast to computer software, which I built decades ago, if you're running a computer program and you upload a file with corrupt data, or if you are using an application and type in control characters, if you do something to kind of upset the apple cart in computer software, usually it'll either give you an error message, many of which you can't understand what the heck it's talking about, or you get a blank screen. Well, when AI was first delivered, these large language models, they're very sensitive to the fact that we always want to give people an answer. And if we don't know, we'll make it up. We'll give them what we think that they want to hear, which is better than I don't know or a blank screen. So that's just my supposition of why Gen AI large languages were built the way they are, to hallucinate by design. But obviously one could second guess and question whether that's a good design or not. But it's just something to be mindful of. And again, there's plenty of evidence where hallucinations have really been a problem. So let's talk about why this matters now. Well, risk is compounding, right? Through autonomous agents that are out there doing stuff that many people don't even monitor and know about. And they're doing stuff without provocation. They're going out there, taking a prompt, and then they're stepping it up by doing things autonomously that it thinks, again, what the user wants, and is making those decisions by itself. And if that human isn't mindful of that, it can do things that, could be harmful, illegal even. We've seen instances of that. Or worst case scenario, when apparently ChatGPT reportedly advised someone who was in suicidal mode to finish the job. So this kind of risk is only going to get worse as these large language models get faster, have more features. Not even talking about where we're headed with quantum computing. But this is the reality. The amount of cyber attacks has increased, by thousands of percent because AI agents are much more effective in getting into and performing illicit acts through browser extensions, through embedding themselves in software, and they're undetectable, unlike viruses and malware and spyware, which often operate right in front of us. These rogue agents are undetectable, which again is why we need to look at the entire end-to-end from an InfoSec standpoint. And here's a funny line, and Chris and I use this in our presentations sometimes when we talk to legal, what I call the insurance gap. Business owners will insure themselves, their cars, their health, their homes. But when it comes to real cybersecurity or AI use policy and governance, they don't adopt the same risk management to their business that they do sometimes to their personal life. And that double standard is problematic. So again, build good habits now. Organizations that are building good habits around AI use, which is, encompassing not only the use of AI, but the policies, having SOPs, engaging in their employees in proper training, making sure they're up to speed, and having guardrails in place that can measure out a policy use and then correct that from a training perspective. Those are all the good habits that organizations really need to start thinking about today. And all right, well, I'll kind of close from here. Before I do that, Chris, anything that you wanted to add, perhaps on that last slide or last slides with respect to governance, which is where we've ended up?
Not terribly. Just to say that governance doesn't have to be a big dirty word, and applies to everyone, even at the small scale. And there are definitely plenty of ways to get started. And I would endorse every single thing on this slide, of course.
Okay, well then I'm gonna, again, just to react, adoption isn't the goal, competence is. If you're going to use AI, go in with eyes wide open, be curious about, AI can do anything. I mean, that's the beauty. As someone who has worked with DevOps teams to design software, I was always frustrated by the fact that I never learned to code. Well, that's out the window. I wrote three major apps in the last week and a half alone, using Claude Code and Cowork. So that's made me a little more dangerous. So AI can alleviate all the constraints, all the blockers, everything that's in our path creatively, whatever we can think of, AI can deliver, with us at the controls. Hygiene before governance, as we talked about, know what you're working with. And then governance before scale. You can't run an app out there if that app doesn't have inherent governance, or if the organization itself that you're deploying this app at or this solution app has no AI SOPs, no idea what governance is. It's up to us to train them, to enlighten them, to make them connect the dots between use of an AI solution and why they need to lock it down, why they need to train their people properly to use it. And again, always human first. I mean, Chris and I talk about AI stewardship. That's what it's all about. And interestingly enough, a lot of companies, including companies like IBM and some of Elon Musk's companies, large corporate companies that laid off a number of employees a year or two ago in anticipation that AI would be able to fill those roles, are now rehiring people very quietly because they've realized that AI isn't really what it's up to. And I think there was an earlier slide, or 50% of AI deployments fail for a variety of reasons, similar to software. And it's usually improper understanding of the use case, poor design, lack of change management, and lack of proper employee training. The same issues that we've been dealing with forever. AI, however, has a tendency to accelerate all of that. And in addition, because much of what it does is not transparent, it makes it that much more difficult to find out where the issue is. So I'm done talking. I'll open the floor up for any questions. You're welcome to reach out to me or Bally or through Bally, if I can ever, Chris and I can ever be of assistance in any of these areas. So thank you for the time. Appreciate it. Any questions? Gotta have questions.
Thank
Tom.
you, Richard. Thank
Or
you,
Bally, do you want
Chris.
to call in the questionnaires?
Yeah, we've got Tom who's raised his hand, and this has been well, thank you to both of you. This is super, super helpful, and yeah, we're gonna have tons of questions. So we're gonna hand over to Tom for the first one. Tom, thank you. If we can, yes, we can keep this slide up for a few seconds and then we can see individuals because, oh, we've got two hands raised. Yeah, so that would be helpful to see folk who've got their hands up. I'll share details, and there's also a actually a gift that Richard and Chris are sharing. So I'll pop that in here for us. It's a one pager. And I know a lot of you've got questions. So yeah, so in turn then, well, let's ask Tom his first.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Bally, and great presentation, Richard. I, I think it's an art the way you designed this. It could have been like a 10-hour presentation or something. So I give you a lot of credit for that. So I have a question. Last year I was working on PR for a tech company, and I sign often when I'm doing work for a company, I'll sign a non-disclosure agreement and so on. I hadn't heard that Samsung story that you told, which was quite interesting. I had heard Tony Robbins interviewing Mark Benioff, and he said, "Yeah, I scouted what my competitor is doing through AI, so I know better than to put my bank account number, in there and stuff like that, or medical information." But I was using AI for this tech company. Like, they do share some information on their website, so it's not all just total secrets. And I'm not part of the development team or anything, but I just wondered if you have any advice on situations like that.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Tom, and that is what's publicly available is definitely usable in any kind of AI interaction. But just, we just need to be mindful that, and we've come across this, public information can change, can evolve. So the importance in any kind of research or information we devolve to the public, that's where I think it's necessary to have citations, and that's why a product like Perplexity is really good, because you can take an output from Claude and pop it in there and then have it review it, which I've started to do when I began to notice that even the guardrails that I built in like Claude Cowork skills, sometimes it just doesn't execute them, which is kind of frustrating. So always, if there's any question about information being released, even if it's publicly known information, a good practice, I think, is to run the output through a RAG like Perplexity and just validate the citations. But very good question. Thanks. Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Not at this time. And actually, I need to apologize. I need to jump a little early, but I do want to thank everybody for giving this opportunity. And I do want to thank you, Richard, for taking point of this fantastic presentation.
Oh, thank you kindly. And we'll be in touch. Tom, did that answer your question?
Yes, it was very helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, sure. I guess, Ivan, you're next, in at least the way it's coming across in my screen. I think you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. That sounds
There
much
you go.
better. There's nothing like talking to yourself.
Don't say anything brilliant while you're on mute. That's what I always say.
I know. I just want to say thank you very much for a very informative presentation. It's really, I get a lot of value out of these sessions, Bally, and wonderful speakers, like Richard, very knowledgeable. You made mention of whether somebody should hold you as an expert or not. I would say yes, you should. because you're ahead of the game, and an expert doesn't know everything. They just happen to be a little further on in the discovery journey, and they're able to help people back. 2 points really. One is you bring up the point of sprawl, I think was the word you used. Yeah, so I call it project creep. It just kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the way, I think I should add in this, and I think what about doing this? And a good chartered accountant would do this next step, And if you're not careful by pulling it back in all the time, um, projects can run away from you when using AI. And then the second part of that you mentioned was context is king. So I've had first-hand experience of this. If you try to play around with the prompt, trying to pull it back, and then you have to go, whoa, stop the bus, cut it off, do an amputation, start again, and off you go again. So do you have any sort of perspective on how to stop it from project creeping or sprawling, and at the same time keeping context, just in general terms, because to me that's kind of guardrail stuff, but it seems to keep wanting to go outside of it.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about context and why we say things like context is king versus prompt engineering. And again, that's all harkening back to the design of a large language model. There's an internal prompt, and then there's your external prompt. The internal prompt is everything that large language model knows about you and anything it can get its hands on. So it can be broad, diverse, even incorrect. Your external prompt, if you just send a prompt and say, hey, I want to know this about A, B, and C, you're not going to get good results. What the context does, and I think Bally's talked about this too, and others, is when you get into a chat session, typically you need to have 1,000 to 2,000 word conversation in a chat session before you can even think about writing the prompt. But the way you structure that is you think about what your optimal output is first, and then you reverse engineer it. You tell the AI, this is what my outcome is. What are the qualifying questions you need to ask? What are the additional documents or access to information that you need? Let's work together, ask me these questions so that we can, essentially what you're doing is helping to shrink the gap between that internal prompt that it has and your external prompt. And that's what context can do. It can collapse that gap. And if you do that, then you're more likely, you're not going to get perfect results. It's always an iterative process, but you'll get a lot closer to really what you want. And that can diminish some of this creep that you're talking about. Because you can have conversations with AI. It happens to me still. And it's like, what were you thinking? So, but, unfortunately, as I said, it's like a 5-year-old genius or an intern. It doesn't have the discipline. It doesn't have a lot of those characteristics or that we have as humans. So, and it can be an iterative process to learn, to teach it, to train it. But you kind of have to go through that.
Yeah, it's really useful because I just did a session with reconstructing some financial accounts, with keeping them anonymous for taxation purposes, and coming up with an argument and all the other things that go around it, but keeping everything anonymous. And what I found really interesting was how it kept adding to the output. And I kept saying, no, you need to stay on track. And then it would say, yeah, you're right, kind of, stroke the ego a little bit, like I'm in control. But I do agree with you. And I think human in the loop is absolutely key.
Yeah. But you hit on a very good point, and that is AI will often kind of step past the boundaries that you want to give it, because again, it lacks that discipline to stay on task. Certain large language models are better at it than others. I think Claude is perhaps better, but even still, it meanders, it wanders. oftentimes I get into a chat session and I'll ask it the question. I said, "Are you coming close to the peak of your context window? Because you're starting to go off the rails here." And it'll tell me, yes, let's create that, because I have a skill now that essentially creates a continuity document, so I can basically pick up where I left off and open a new chat, knowing that to continue in that chat, which is which is now polluted and fairly long in tooth, is probably going to give me mediocre results. So that's a thing to be mindful of too, because if it's past its context window, it's going to forget stuff. It's going to fail to apply some of the guardrails you may even be using, and it's best to kind of start over in a new chat. But with that transition document.
Yeah, that's really helpful. As somebody that's just experienced that, I can vouch for that. Absolutely. So thank you.
Sure. Casimir.
Yes. Coming a little bit back to Ivan's question, one thing that I've done, I put in the general instructions is that do not suggest things, because that's what the AI does. Every time it will go, how about this, how about that? And suddenly it goes, you have much bigger scope than you thought about. And the other thing is about this token window is that even then, currently we have 1 million tokens. The AI cannot handle that. It will start to about 50 to 60%. And it starts to just read the beginning and the end, and the middle is forgotten. So that's time to start a new session with the handout document. And that's a skill that you should create in Claude, because you will need that time and time again.
Yeah.
Okay, now coming a little bit back to your presentation and the guardrails and the systems. Okay, let me see how to put it. You get kind of your system and guardrails in place. How do you address the human factor that, okay, it will look at it the first time with thought, then when it has kind of the authorization that you can rely on the AI because we have this, say, ISO certificate or whatsoever, what happens when the 20th time with the human? Is it a rubber stamp, or is it still kind of thinking about the result? How to address that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Casimir, because I know in working with agents, it can run perfectly 19 times in a row, and the 20th time it just blows up. And there's no rhyme or reason, there's no excuse, or there may not even be any preventative steps you can take to prevent that. So, you're right about providing guardrails, and I do this in Claude Co in my skills that I create in Claude Co, where many of my skills are, pages and pages long, because, I've just added corrections when the AI has chosen to deviate, because it again, you're right. The human part is it's kind of like running in a bobsledding race. We as humans have to make sure that we're steering it so that it doesn't go off the path and end up in a tree somewhere where people can get hurt. That's how I kind of look at it. We have to continually steer the AI bobsled and keep it on the track. I don't know that we can, I don't know that we can ever totally allow it to operate without us having eyes on it. And typically what happens is as soon as we reach that level of confidence, whether it's in blog posts or social media posts, the kinds of things that are not earth-shattering necessarily, Um, at minimum, keep an eye on it. I'm not saying you have to read every word, every one, but if you are blogging, posting, just hit, eyeball it enough. And if you see that what the output is good and consistent, then that's good. Chances are what you're seeing is of the kind of quality that you're expecting. But if you're doing it and you see misfires, then you really have to pay close attention until that misfire no longer happens. So it's a really great question. To what degree, I guess, as humans, do we need to maintain our involvement? And I think that's really a consequence directly of the quality, the consistency, and whether the output meets our expectations. If it does, it's like I know whenever I do a validation in a RAG, after it finishes its analysis and perhaps I make adjustments to it, I say, what is your degree of confidence? Because my goal is always 95% or above. Tom and I do a podcast on true journalism. It wouldn't look good if we as journalists are not reporting the news accurately when we're doing our podcast interviews. So it has to meet at least a 95% or above confidence level. But again, that's the AI interpreting its own stuff sometimes. So you have to be. It's also a hawk watching the chicken coop, which is why I use Perplexity to check Claude, for example, and why the whole multimodal content. Tom says he always runs it through Fox News. Yeah, of course. But did I answer your question? I may have just rambled a bit.
Yeah, it was just if we think about enterprise level or business level, how do you manage this human layer that is kind of, well, how you look above or below the AI that kind of we continue to keep the eye on the ball and not just become a rubber stamp that, okay, it was, okay, AI said this, because it's also an excuse for a human. Well, I'm not to blame. AI said that.
Yes.
And it's kind of carte blanche of not thinking and not paying attention or not doing your job or your role as well as you can. So that was kind of the thought behind the question.
Yeah, no, very, 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 very important question. And again, you mentioned it, in an enterprise, that's why it's so important to have AI SOPs and AI guardrails and have a mechanism in place to ensure that employees are abiding by it. And if not, then having a means to retrain them to make sure that they're following things in that vein. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
because AI. Okay.
Yeah,
Go
thank
ahead,
you.
Bally.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you so much. I'm also mindful of everyone's time. I want to say that we often have this, if you've been to the UK, and Richard, you have, you always have around London, they say mind the gap, so don't fill in the gap. And what we're noticing, actually, AI loves to fill the gap. So there's no minding of that gap at all. It will just kind of fill it as much. So what you've shared today, absolutely everyone, we all, we're in this together, right? So we're in this, we're using these tools and really understanding, and what you touched on is for people to rethink. So think about how they're utilizing them, and ignorance won't pay. And often that's the thing. I don't know. Well, it's not enough, right? It won't carry in courts, as you're saying. It's not going to carry. So absolutely, it's taking responsibility and having those leaders who, I support, you support, to make sure that we actually monitor and assess and audit, moving forward, and this is going to continue. It won't stop. It'll only get bigger as we go further into this. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for your time, and being and Hire, always lovely having you, and everyone having you all here, because actually by doing this together, we're not kind of going like with it, we're not kind of just being kind of driven by these tools, or as you said, they're just as they are tools, but we're really thinking through these conversations and having those. So let's continue that. We will meet next on the 5th of August. Thank you all, and I know a lot of us have spent more than those hours. I know Casimir has for sure, because we connect a lot. So I just want to thank you all for your time and the work that you're training yourselves and getting yourselves to the level that we need to. So thank you all, and do connect. We put a gift in. I enjoy that, and reach out to myself, Richard, for questions. And thank you again. Speak to you soon and see you in 2 weeks. Thank you, Richard. And Chris, of course.
Thanks. You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily, readily. Find my name. Thanks all. And thank you again, Bally, for the opportunity.
Yeah, I
Take
can
care all.
share. I'll
Thank
share
you.
your
Take care.
details. Thank you,
Speak
everyone.
soon. Bye.
Bye for
It was
now.
great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.